Hirlock. I wish to thank all deputies for their contribution this evening, and I am grateful for the opportunity to close the debate for the Government on the Sinn Féin's ban on rent increases bill. And I've listened intently to the contributions from deputies since I took over this part of the debate. As the Minister has outlined earlier, the Government are submitting a timed amendment to this bill, and we will consider it again at second stage in 12 months' time, when the impact of the new RPZ rent increase restriction provided in the Government's Residential Tenancies No. 2 Bill 2021, which passed unanimously last night in Dáil Éireann, will have been felt on the ground. The Government expects that the switch from a straight 4% per annum rent increase restriction in the RPZs to the new restriction, where any rent increase cannot exceed general inflation, will be impactful on the ground. The Government is keenly aware of the challenge that tenants face. We know that rents are unaffordable for many, and that rent increases can exacerbate financial difficulty. We know that many people would prefer to own and not to rent their home. We know that people want a secure home. We know that we need a residential rental sector with an adequate supply to ensure that rents are affordable. The Government has and will continue to implement measures to promote equity, fairness and security of tenure in the private rental sector. With the support of Government colleagues and acting on the evidence produced through the ESRI research, the Minister introduced significant tenancy protections in the Residential Tenancies and Valuations Act of 2020, the RTVA, with effect from August 1, 2020. The Act introduced permanent and temporary protections for those tenants who are facing rent arrears as a result are at risk of losing their tenancy. While those temporary protections have been subsumed under the Planning and Development and Residential Tenancies Act 2020, the RTA, permanent protections under the RTVA still apply, requiring landlords to serve both the RTB and the tenant with a 28-day warning notice, increased from 14 days, seeking payment of rent arrears and any related notice of termination. Upon receipt of the warning notice, the RTB acknowledges receipt to the landlord, and the tenant provides information to the tenant, enabling them to get advice from the Money Advice and Budgeting Service (MABS), and offers assistance to the tenant in obtaining this advice. Any notice of termination grounded on rent arrears will be invalid if the rent arrears warning notice or related notice of termination itself had not been served on both the RTB and the tenant. The aim of this is to ensure early action is taken to address rent arrears to benefit both the tenant and the landlord. The tailored approach in the PDRTA protects tenants from imminent tenancy termination caused by COVID-19 related rent arrears. The PDRTA introduced similar temporary residential tenancy protections to those under the RTVA to cover the period from the 11th of January 2021 to the 12th of July 2021. While recognising the constitutionality protection of property rights of landlords. The most vulnerable tenants in rent arrears due to COVID-19 and at risk of losing their tenancy can gain enhanced tenancy protections under the PDRTA if they follow procedures under the Act and make the necessary declaration. The PDRTA temporarily protects tenants from any rent increases, any termination notice on grounds of rent arrears. In addition to making the necessary written declaration to the RTB and to his or her landlord under the PDRTA, a tenant is required to immediately request the RTB to assist him or her to obtain advice from MABS and serve a written notice on his or her landlord requesting a consultation to make an arrangement for the payment of rent. The aim is to set tenants and landlords on the right track to resolving any rent issues arising. The PDRTA protections against rent increases are available to the most vulnerable tenants and under the Residential Tenancies No. 2 Bill of 2021. These protections will continue to be available until the 20th of January 2022. In addition to significantly reducing the level of any rent increases in rent pressure zones, as detailed by the Minister in his opening remarks, the bill will also restrict the level of upfront payments required of tenants to a total value that does not exceed 2 months' rent to cover any deposit and 1 month rent in advance. Any proposed measure that impacts on private property rights requires detailed consideration and scrutiny, having regard to the provisions of Article 43 of the Constitution and the associated legal complexities. During the recent drafting of the Emergency Measures and Public Interest COVID-19 Act of 2020, the Residential Tenancies and Valuation Act of 2020, the Residential Tenancies Act of 2020, the Planning and Development Act and Residential Tenancies Act of 2020, the Residential Tenancies Act of 2021 and the Residential Tenancies No. 2 Bill of 2021. The Office of the Attorney-General has advised on the complex legal issues arising with any limitation of property rights under the Constitution, the need for careful targeting of enhanced legal protections to the most vulnerable tenants for a limited time frame, and for the balancing of the legal rights of both tenants and landlords informed the drafting of these acts. Deputy O'Brien's bill does not show any evidence of appropriate policy balancing within the proposal. I am confident that the restrictions provided for in the Residential Tenancies Bill of 2021 is the correct and balanced policy response, and we need to give it time to bed into the sector to have any effect on rents. In conclusion, I wish to emphasise that the Programme for Government recognises the important role that private rented sector plays in housing many people and will continue to do so into the future. This Government will address challenges in the sector, including standards, security and affordability for renters. The measures under Residential Tenancies No. 2 Bill of 2021, passed by Dáil Éireann last night, provide a timely, effective and proportionate response to help those most vulnerable tenants impacted by COVID-19, and to help all tenants in rent pressure zones by requiring that any rent increases does not exceed general inflation. The bill helps all tenants outside of rent pressure zones by maintaining the frequency of rent reviews to no more than every second year. Landlords will also benefit from rent certainty provided for under the bill into the medium term. The bill provides for the enhanced tenancy protections under the PDRTA to continue until the 12th of January 2022, so rather than the usual 28-day notice applies for a termination of notice grounded on rent arrears, a 90-day notice period applies. The earliest termination date allowed for those most vulnerable tenants will be the 13th of January 2022. Rent increases are also prohibited for relevant tenancies until the 13th of January 2022, with no backdating allowed. My department will work hard with the RTB to continue its change management programme to strengthen its functions and its assistance to tenants and landlords. The RTB has been highly responsive, particularly in the fast-moving context of COVID-19, to the needs of tenants, and Government is continually providing up-to-date assistance. I wish to record Government's sincere gratitude for their continuing efforts in this regard and for the help of MABs, Threshold and all NGOs, approved housing bodies and local authorities that help in addressing the evolving housing crisis. The Government is committed to supporting an adequate supply of residential rental accommodation by ensuring equity and fairness for landlords and for tenants alike. Improving the standards, security and affordability for renters is a priority for me, for Minister O'Brien and for this Government. We are making significant changes in recognition of the fact that tenants continue to face persistent pressures on the rental and housing markets. Our approach to change must continue to be carefully balanced.